Hi everyone. We're the Google Hangouts group for sensory integration, and we're going to start off with introductions. My name is Shawnee Marklin, and I'm from East Tennessee.
Hey everybody, my name is Meredith Stewart, and I am from the northern suburbs near Chicago.
And my name is Kathleen Dorr, and I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm currently living in Northern California at Travis Air Force Base.
My name is Lindsay Carmen, and I am currently living in Columbus, Ohio.
Hi guys, my name is Emily. I'm from Wyoming, but I am currently living in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Hey guys, my name is Annie. I am from St. Louis, Missouri, and I am living in Colorado.
Okay. Hi, my name's Dawn Blankenship, and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio.
Hi, this is Deepthi, and I am the Blue Man today.
Okay guys, so I'm going to start with our discussion on sensory integration today. Sensory integration is a theory that was formulated by Dr. Jean Ayres, I hope I'm saying her last name correctly, in 1968 to aid in increasing the overall functioning of children diagnosed with autism and other developmental disabilities. Ayres defines sensory integration as the neurological processes that organizes sensation from one's own body from the environment and makes it possible to use the body effectively in their environment. The sensory integration theory has three components to it, each of which I will touch on briefly. The first component states that a person's learning depends on the ability to take in and process sensation from movement, smells, touch, sounds, etc., and then use these to plan and organize their behavior, which leads to the second component, which states that those who have difficulty processing various sensory information often have trouble producing appropriate actions, which can interfere with behavior and ultimately their learning. The third component of SI states that incorporating activities that focus on enhancing certain sensations, like such as playing with a child in a bin of materials with different textures or rice, listening to various types of music, playing with scent jars with different smells, can help an individual improve their ability to process these different sensations, aiding in their learning, which will hopefully improve their behavior. The link that the article that I have gotten all this information from, I will post in the discussion board as after the video gets posted, so you can all see the article that I'm referring to, who was written by DeGraff. And as noted by DeGraff in the article, the main goal of sensory integration is to provide individuals with stimulation that will address certain brain levels, which will enable them to mature or function more naturally to assist the brain to work as a more integrated whole. With sensory integration difficulties, there are a variety of different kinds of symptoms that can be seen in relation to all the different sensory systems located within the body, and sensory integration aids in integrating each one of these senses as one into a whole. The first system that I'll talk about briefly is the somatosensory system, which is also known as the tactile system. And before I get started, with each of these systems, an individual who has difficulty integrating sensory information can be either hypersensitive or hyposensitive. So a person who is hypersensitive to certain tactile sensations might avoid sensations of light, or like light touch on tags of clothing, avoid certain fabrics. They might dislike taking baths. They might also not like having their nails cut or avoid walking on grass or sand. Someone who's hyposensitive with the system, they have an increased tolerance for touch and might not realize that they've dropped something while they're walking. They might have difficulty completing fine motor tasks. and writing, and they may be unaware of someone else's touch unless it's an intense kind of touch. The second system is the proprioceptive system, which is being aware of where your body is located in space. Someone who is hypersensitive in the system might not know where their body parts are or how they relate to each other. They might avoid lifting heavy things. Someone who's hyposensitive in the proprioceptive system might purposely bump into things or walls as they walk. They might press with force when they write, and they might like being tucked in tightly when they go to bed. The third system that I'm going to talk about is the vestibular system, which relates to movement and balance. Someone who's hypersensitive may get car sick, lose balance easy, is very cautious when they're moving. Someone who's hyposensitive might have trouble sitting still. You might see them rock or jump up and down repeatedly. And oftentimes people who are hyposensitive don't really get dizzy a whole lot. The next and final system that I'm going to talk about is the auditory system, which we all know is the ability to hear. Someone who is hypersensitive might cover their ears or run away from certain loud noises. They may become upset or over-emotional when loud noises are heard, and they might even scream or talk loudly to compete with these loud noises. Someone who is hyposensitive, may talk excessively. They might like making loud noises, such as screams or yells, or they may enjoy being in loud places and seek out these things. Next, Kathleen is going to touch on sensory processing disorders.
Thank you, Meredith. So, in order to qualify for sensory integration therapy, the client should be diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder. So like Meredith said, sensory integration is how the nervous system receives messages from the senses and converts them into appropriate behavioral responses. Sensory processing disorder is a condition where the sensory signals fail to be converted into appropriate behavioral responses. And Dr. Ayers refers to this as a neurological traffic jam. The traffic jam prevents certain parts of the brain from receiving these impulses that are required to interpret sensory information appropriately. And this can result in difficulties with everyday tasks that we might take for granted. Clients can have issues with motor clumsiness, they can have behavioral problems, anxiety, depression, problems in school, etc. These all can be impacted with a sensory processing disorder. Dennis Moore's article from 2008 says that children who are born with fetal alcohol syndrome, autism, and traumatic brain injury are all more likely to be diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder. And individuals who are diagnosed with SPD, sensory processing disorder, can have one sense affected or they can have multiple senses affected. So one person might react to light, whereas another person might react to touch and movement, but not light. And like Meredith said, individuals can overrespond, hypersensitive, or underrespond, hyposensitive, to sensory input, depending on the severity of their sensory processing disorder diagnosis. And a study done by Ahn and colleagues in 2004 suggested that 1 in 20 children are affected by some level of sensory processing disorder. And that can be neurotypical children, or it can be, children diagnosed with autism or fetal alcohol syndrome, that kind of thing. And then a study done by Ben Sassone and colleagues in 2009 suggested that 1 in 6 children experience sensory processing disorders that are so severe that it significantly affects their quality of life. And no concrete cause has been found for sensory processing disorders, although it's suspected that it's inherited. And prenatal and birth complications, as well as environmental causes, have been implicated in the diagnosis of sensory processing disorders. And usually SPD is treated through occupational therapy, and the goal of occupational therapy is to foster appropriate responses to sensation. And now I'm going to pass it on to Lindsay to talk about sensory diets.
Okay. A sensory diet is the appropriate sensory motor input that a person needs to feel alert, exert effortless control, and perform at his or her best. There are 4 types of sensory seekers. There's the over-responsive person. This is the person that is trying to avoid the sensory, they need more calming activities. There's the under-responsive person. They're seeking sensory input and they seem sluggish and need help getting to their threshold. The third is the sensory seeking person. They're the thrill seeker. So they're not as sluggish as the under-responsive, but they're still under-responsive, but they seek more input to reach their threshold. The fourth is the mixed responsive person. They have some moments of extreme over and under response to activities. It's more common for children with autism. Sensory diets are very individualized. They often consist of visual tools such as a first then or a step-by-step map of 3 to 6 activities for the child to complete. They can use break cards if they're feeling sluggish or overstimulated, and oftentimes they'll have self-regulated checklists for older kids that will consist of 5 sensory activities that they're able to complete one by one. I was able to interview an occupational therapist at the school that I work at, and she just was emphasizing how important sensory diets are and how beneficial they've been. For example, she has seen classrooms that schedule movement breaks in the mornings and the afternoons. And according to her testimony, these are the classrooms that seem to run the smoothest. So, at our school, we have recess, plus we have a 15-minute gross motor later in the day, or for some classes, it's right at the beginning of the day. Sensory needs can be met without a specific sensory diet for a student if they are implemented in a group setting, and it makes it more fun for the students. So giving those movement breaks and doing like group activities can be pretty fun for the kids as well. And actual sensory diets can cause stress for some teachers or caregivers. So trying to include them with group activities makes it more enjoyable for everyone that's involved. And next, I'm going to send it over to Shawnee to talk about ethics and the lack of evidence.
Hello. So, as we've been talking about, sensory processing disorders come in a variety of types, and most of us, at least from personal experience, have had some experience with sensory integration. However, when we started looking at this, we realized there's not a lot of evidence to support the sensory integration. Using the National Standards Project, it's not listed as an established treatment. It's listed as emerging, which means there's just not a whole lot of data around it yet to fully place it in an established category. And so this goes against Ethics 210, which talks about the responsibility to recommend scientifically supported ones, because there is little evidence, but it's not enough to classify it according to the national standards as an established treatment. And then we have all seen it, though, so we're kind of like, well, what does it mean if we've all seen it, but it's not technically an established treatment? What goes behind that? And what type of things can we do to either figure out how to use it or when to use it or if we even should use it? And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to talk about the lack of training that comes with sensory integration.
Okay. I'm going to talk about the lack of training for using sensory integration in our field is ABA. Sensory integration is actually part of the occupational therapy field, and it does require extensive education and training to perform the procedures correctly, but in the ABA field, sensory integration training is not required or mandatory, and it's not really there. The training isn't even available. So in order to get that, like we said before, there's not a lot of articles. The training, you really have to do your homework to figure out what it is that you can do to help your clients. Some of the sensory integration that we can see at work now in the ABA field is we give our clients squeezes, spaghetti arms, Some centers may have swings, trampolines, weighted vests, all of this that if the child has this specified in their behavior plan, or they have a sensory diet, you probably need to have the BCBA go to an occupational therapist to figure out the correct procedures and then learn how to implement them correctly so you actually are not harming the client when you think when you're doing it correctly, which also goes back to ethics guideline 5.02, which is the limitations on training. So we do have a lack of training, but the important part of sensory integration is the communication between the BCBA, the BTs, the family, if the child or client is receiving OT, and then communicating with the occupational therapist to get that proper training to perform the correct procedures. So along with that, I'm going to pass it on to Annie, who's going to talk about possible harmful effects of using sensory integration.
Okay. Hey guys, I'll be talking about, as Emily said, potentially harmful sensory integration procedures. While sensory integration is not harmful per se, some sensory integration therapy can be very uncomfortable for a client. Children with autism can be very sensitive to certain types of sensory input, such as touch, sound, light, etc. The therapist must be very observant of the child when they are giving sensory input in order to make sure they're not harming the kiddo or giving them unnecessary discomfort. One example of a potentially harmful sensory input is spinning, which was surprising to me. According to A Sensory Life, there is a powerful impact of spinning on the brain. Here are some basic facts and points to consider when spinning a child. Spinning is the most powerful form of sensory input that the brain takes into process. 15 minutes of spinning can have a 6 to 8 hour impact, good or bad, on the brain and self-regulation. Some children with sensory challenges over-register spinning input to a point that one spin can cause a significant response and a systematic reaction. It is possible to register sensory correctly in one direction, but not the other. So basically, a child can handle spinning one direction, but not even feel it at all if they go the other. So while spinning can be helpful for calming down a child for sensory integrative treatments, there are some serious side effects to be considered, and spinning should be monitored very closely because it can negatively affect a child, and we wouldn't even know it. The Sensory Life goes on to explain that we wouldn't know it because a meltdown that occurs 5 hours after spinning could be due to the brain unloading and processing. And we would think that it would be, for example, a door slamming, but it would be the effects of the spinning. So going off of what Emily talked about with the lack of training, not being educated in sensory integration can be very harmful. For example, I was shown how to do joint compressions and brushing when I first started in this field, but I never went through proper training. Joint compression can be very hard on a little kid's joints and can cause more harm than good if not properly taught. Especially, it can be harmful if you're not familiar with the kiddo, and I was doing joint compressions as soon as I started working with him. And so I wasn't able to monitor whether or not he was feeling any discomfort because I was just seeing him for the first time. Sensory integration can be an amazing thing. It can help kids calm down, lower unwanted behaviors, help them orient themselves, etc. However, there are real harmful situations that may occur because of the lack of knowledge or the lack of training. Watching and understanding our clients will help lower these risks, and giving sensory integration in small doses may also help decrease the potential risk. I just wanted to reiterate what Emily said about breaking the ethical code of 5.02, limitations of training. I personally felt like I broke that code when I started working with this kiddo, but I wasn't aware of it because I had a serious lack of training for giving joint compressions. And then one other ethical code that needs to be considered is 5.11, the training, supervision, and safety. Sensory integration, when not properly trained, can cause harm to both the client and the behavior technician or clinician who is working with the kiddo. And these are two ethical codes that we should take serious consideration of before implementing sensory integration that we feel untrained for. So next, I want to introduce Dawn, who will give us some personal examples.
Okay, so my portion of the talk is to focus on my personal experience with sensory integration, particularly sensory diets, and I'm actually going to talk about one specific child. I have a child that I work with that building in regular systematic sensory input roughly every 2 to 3 tasks within his visual schedule just did wonders for reducing and preventing his non-contextual self-stimulatory noises when nothing else in the past had worked. Examples of activities that we might do with this child are things like a crab walk, wall push-ups, running, jumping, jumping jacks. His favorite thing is we call let's be a hot dog a burrito, and we roll him up really tight in a blanket, and then he gets to say what toppings he wants, and we bounce this yoga ball on him. So I want ketchup, and we bounce it on. I want onions, and we bounce it on. And he's able to receive that deep pressure in sort of a very fun gameplay sort of a way. All of the activities that we are doing are very fun and play-based, kind of more along the lines of what Lindsay was talking about, rather than what Annie was referring to where it could really be potentially harmful. We're not doing spinning, we're not doing joint compressions, anything like that. I think when you're implementing a sensory diet, it's very important to make sure that the activity matches their mood. For example, if they're very excited and very heightened, maybe you want to do an activity to help get that energy out, like running or jumping, versus when they're very low energy, maybe you can give them a fidget toy or let them play in a sensory bin with slime, with dough, with something like that, that can help give them some sensory input, but it's going to match their mood. I think how it's presented is also extremely important. We want to make sure that it's preventative versus waiting until they are to a heightened state to sort of present some of these activities. If it's systematically built into their schedule, it's more likely to help and prevent versus giving it to them right after they've done engaged in an unwanted behavior that could possibly inadvertently reinforce that. I think it's also incredibly important to make sure that you're collecting clean, accurate data as to what helps versus what hurts for each specific kiddo. I think sometimes systematic high energy activities can really escalate rather than help. This particular child that I'm talking about, 2 to 3 minutes of doing something physical really does help harness that energy, bring him back so that he doesn't engage quite as much in these self-stimulatory non-contextual noises, where I have another child that I work with that it absolutely does not work for him, and to give him a little bit of that high energy sensory input, it's really just going to escalate him unless he has 15, 20 minutes to actually get his energy all the way out. So I think it's very important to know your target audience. Per the data that I've collected for this child and for several other children that I work with, sensory diets absolutely work as an intervention for some self-stimulatory and automatically reinforced behaviors for some children, but not for all. So I think it's very, very important to be able to understand that. And I think that's a big piece of the unknown with there's not enough research to tell us, well, why? Why does it work for this child and not for this child? And that's an ethical dilemma that we come across. As Shawnee pointed out a little bit earlier, according to the National Standards Report, sensory integration is considered an emerging treatment. When I look at an emerging treatment, I think of it as something that should be used with caution, not fully dismissed. So there's not quite enough evidentiary support for it to be considered a fully evidence-based practice. However, we do know, and my group through this process has talked, each of us have had experience and positive experience with sensory diets or different sensory integrations. So I guess our biggest ethical dilemma and sort of our take-home point that we want to leave you with today is, where do we find that fine line between it's not fully evidence-based. So really, as behavior analysts, we're always looking for that hard evidence. We're really not supposed to suggest it per the code of ethics. However, isn't it unethical in itself to not provide a therapy that we know will work, some sort of systematic, very carefully implemented plan that we know is going to help a child, that we've seen evidence and we've seen it work for them? Isn't it somewhat unethical in itself to say, well, we're not going to let you do this because it's just an emerging treatment? So that's sort of our take-home point.
I think you guys are doing such a fabulous job. I feel like I'm just speechless. You're all just, this has run so smoothly. And I love the concluding question, because that is the big question ultimately that we all face at the end of the day, that it is something we know. So Dawn, you're saying that something we know. What is the basis of that knowing? Is that a belief? Is that something we know from, that we have some evidence from maybe the other therapist on the team? So, and oftentimes a lot of these, not so intense, so not the spinning kind of sensory integration treatments, there are similar simple things such as brushing the arms. And so if there's something harmless, what I have done in the past, because you always have somebody in the team, either the family or other therapists, who are very passionate about that particular treatment, and I might think that it does nothing except maybe, because most of them have a huge component of attention, and that isn't really segregated while providing the sensory integration, quote unquote treatment. So what I have done in the past, and I've heard from colleagues, is to have a specific time frame that you try it out. Have it, so as you said, Dawn, a systematic way of assessing it or building it in. So not building it in per se versus just try it out. Like, do a week of this hairbrushing thing. So if it's something harmless, something seemingly harmless that you can get approval from everybody on the team, and if there are any medical professionals involved, and try it for a week or two, collect data on it, see if it actually affects the behavior, because ultimately it shouldn't just feel like it's working. It shouldn't be something we know is working. Our data should tell us that if it's working or not. So if it's not working, then it's not working. So we collect our own evidence for that specific treatment for that individual. There are parents who say, having glasses just makes him go nuts. When he wears his glasses, he just doesn't like the way it touches on his nose. Okay, well, let's try it. Let's try how it goes. And there are a lot of sensory integration treatment that I don't think are anything else except for just treatments. If you don't label them as sensory integration treatment, they're just treatments. A lot of things that we do in ABA can be labeled in other categories. Somebody might say, well, that's not AB, that's edible treatment. That's emotional eating. You're giving this kid candy for when he's upset. Well, except we don't give candy when they're upset. So, you can call it any other kind of treatment. But the way it is ABA is that we implement it in a systematic way, and we collect data to assess if it's working or not. But the ones that are these, seemingly harmful ones, the spinning ones and the intense holding them this way, or the weighted blanket ones or the jaw presses, those I would refrain from us having to do anything with, because they are physically uncomfortable, and ethically, again, we have to draw some line in saying this is not something I'm comfortable trying. And whatever parents do at their own time in front of you, that's their child, they can do it, but we shouldn't be the one prescribing that specific component in their treatment plan.
I agree with you. I used to work with a little guy who was teeny tiny, short, real short for his age, and he used to jump around a lot. So the BCBA we were working with suggested wearing a backpack, a weighted backpack, and changing the amount of weights that were in it every day, or the amount of books that we placed in it, or whatever it was that was in there, so that the weight was different each day, but it was a little heavy. And I think he wore it for maybe a year, and then his new behavior plan rolled out per his new IEP, and the team noticed a lot of this shoulder behavior, which I think was a negative side effect of having to wear the backpack and constantly feeling it slide off his shoulders, and then having this kind of little this behavior reaction, which in turn ended up being super distracting for him. When he was trying to do anything else, all he could focus on was this feeling on his shoulders that he just had to, get it off. And he would constantly, you'd see negative maladaptive behaviors in relation to the backpack because he wanted to wear it. He wanted to know where it was. I mean, I can't quantify it, but I truly think he found some sort of security from it. Like he felt like almost like it was a security blanket for him, kind of.
I think I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think those are all really good points. And I think, that's the biggest ethical concern that we across the board came across is the unknown. We don't know enough about what some of these things can cause and can't cause as far as side effects. And I think the point that you made a little earlier, some of these things, they don't have to be considered sensory treatments. They're just treatments. The ones that we know are really just play-based and we know are safe, those are great. But the other things are what is really, really concerning. And I think across the board, something, that has been sort of a theme in this whole course so far is the extremes. Either end of the extremes are always concerning. So.
Yeah, I mean, remember we watched the video on the shock therapy, and some kids wanted that. So I think, as Meredith pointed out, it's a security. Some things become security blanket, and a lot of our clients who are cognitively independent enough to understand what's going on, they hear what the team says, and the one thing I absolutely work hard in avoiding is our clients hearing about what we think is working and not working, because you can have an individual say, well, I need my hairbrush. I need my this because this is working. And that is just so disappointing and disheartening to know that a client just believes something works because we think it works because they've heard us say, and they start believing that, and they start thinking that, oh, I need this, otherwise I will fail. And like simple things like hugs. We all are touchy-feely, and this doesn't sound nice coming out that way, but you know what I mean. With our little kids, we're all affectionate. We're all, tickling them. We're all, playing games with them and swinging them around and doing things. And we're doing that in the name of high intensity positive reinforcement, high intensity social attention. But that could be considered sensory by somebody else, hug, that's like a tight compress. So we do these things in Annie, as you pointed out, these things are just so subtle. They're built in. We don't even know that. But it is something more when, as Dawn said, it's extreme. We need to try that. If we end up if somebody starts believing that we need to hug them every 5 minutes, well, that's going to be that's not going to be possible. It's just going to be dysfunctional for the child and the staff to run through the program. And again, then there is no data. So you go to the other end of wanting to hug the client every 5 minutes, or a tight hug, or this kind of hug. And I think ultimately it really is something we have to make decisions based on our data. So if you've made observations that, that's when you do your ABC, that's when you do your some sessions, pull out sessions, and work with the client and see if this thing improves or doesn't, because we don't want to end up wasting their time doing something that might or might not work. And at the same time, sometimes it's a matter of pleasing a certain team member. You have certain kind of therapist or a parent advocate, or even the parents who think that, oh, they will do really good if they get 2 minutes every 2 hours when they can just smell a lotion. Why not? I mean, that is something we can do just from a perspective of collaboration. It's harmless. You don't think smelling a lotion is disruptive, and it's 2 minutes for every 2 hours. Okay, fine. It's all right. So we can have them have that, and we can put an arrow in our graphs and say lotion smelling started, and see if it makes any difference. This way you're collecting data, and then 6 months later you can say, listen, I've been doing that for 6 months. We're taking data, we are implementing with integrity. Every 2 minutes, every 2 hours they get it, and there are no changes. Perhaps we should reconsider the smelly lotion thing. It doesn't have any downside, but why have any component be in a treatment? Because these documents are then travel across agencies, and we don't want them to be the 25-year-old and still smelling a lotion because when they were 15 we started having the smell of lotion and it just does not work. So so it's kind of something that we just have to be aware and collecting data, and if it's not evidence-based to begin with, we can collect evidence and then show if it's working or not working, and be open to it. Like, we don't want to say, this is just disgusting. We're not having the smelly lotion. This is not ABA treatment. It might work. I like smelly things. I like when I can have if I'm having a rough day, just pick up a scented candle, and that just feels nice. And for the next 30 minutes, I'm in a better mood. So why not be open to things if they're, if they're a little bit on the side of good reasoning, but at the same time, not be a fanatic and say, well, we will do it because we believe and all that stuff. So, again, it's a balancing act, following the ethics and consult with colleagues. And that's, I think, one thing we have to remember is that we don't have to have all the answers at the tip of our tongue. We will need to consult our books, the ethics code. We will need to consult each other throughout our profession. To date, I consult with my faculty when dealing with student issues. I've been teaching for a while. I've been in this field for 15 years. I still will consult with a client. With a colleague. I might call a friend who I'm comfortable with, who won't judge me. But at the same time, you just have to know that you don't have to figure all this out on your own. That colleague consultation is of immense value. So build good networks, like you're working together here. Latch on to each other, because for the rest of your professional life, you will need, like, hey, what do you think about this? And oh, I don't know, we need to figure this out. Oh, let's talk to this person. So just know that you don't have to know all this stuff. You just have to know how to find the information.
Are we good?
I see all smiling faces. I think we're good. Any questions at this?
And she was very sensory seeking. And so at school, she would wear, when she would kind of start getting a little up, she would wear a weighted vest. And her parents were divorced, unfortunately, but her dad, I remember going to her house after school to do a session, and her dad asked me, well, did they make her wear the vest today? He did not like the vest at all. But it worked for her at school, and so they continued using it at school. But he was very much not into the vest at all. So that's kind of, in my opinion, it's like, well, if mom's okay with the vest and dad's not okay with the vest, do we still use the vest? So that was, I ended up getting taken off that team, so I never found out what happened with the vest. So
well, and that kind of is an issue that you have across the board for individuals whose parents don't live together. Across the board for any treatment, one person might say timeout yes, and one person might say timeout no. So I think at that point you have to say, we need a consensus from both of you in terms of what we need to do, because you're both legally involved in this child's life, and we can't be taking sides or making this decision. Or you then take the route of, we're going to take data and see how this child does. Because the best thing about ABA, which my favorite, is let the data speak for themselves. You don't have to take sides. You don't have to say anything. Like, here's when we started this, and this is what the graph says. Take a look at it, and you basically just don't have to say anything, and everything just settles in place the moment you show these data. Any questions at this point about sensory integration, how it relates to our ethical challenges before we close the recording? No? Okay, well, good. So thank you all for having such a great, lively discussion. I think you just flowed really well. It was very well organized and prepared, and I thank you for your time, and thank you, Shani, for recording and volunteering to upload and do all the technical work.